It's the Bible's greatest mysteries. Welcome, I'm Derek Gilbert.
I am Sharon Gilbert, and we're delighted that you've chosen to join us once again. We have a guest on here today that, frankly, his information is going to shock you, inform you, and drive you to your Bible.
Absolutely. We had the opportunity to meet him when he came to visit Skywatch TV, and we hit it off with him and his family. He's got similar interests to ours. We found that we have researched very similar topics, but he's been on the ground in places that we would love to go, such as the mountains of Ararat.
Yes, he visits Turkey over and over. We told him, look, we got to go with you. So one of these days, who knows? But in the meantime, he brings us the on-the-ground information.
Yes. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll be discussing the subject of his new book, which has got the compelling title, Fallen Angels, Giants, Monsters, and the World Before the Flood.
Oh, our kind of book.
Exactly. This is right up our alley. So we were really delighted to meet him. Before we jump into the interview, though, we do want to remind you, please download our app. If you haven't done so yet, if you're watching us on YouTube, God bless you. Please click the subscribe, click the bell for notifications, hit the like button, and then go to our website and get our app, gilberthouse.org/app. That guarantees all of our content comes to you, not just the Bible's greatest mysteries, but Unraveling Revelation, our weekly Bible study, my podcast, Sharon's podcast, The Armored Sheep.
And thank you for that. There are some programs that will be edited for the mainstream platforms.
Yes.
You will get the full version on the app.
Occasionally on my podcast, we talk politics and stuff, and we found the hard way there are some things that violate community standards. So want to bypass the gatekeepers of big tech, get our app, download it to your smartphone or tablet. It's available for iOS, Android, Amazon, Kindle, Fire. There's also TV versions. You can get a version for Roku, Apple TV, Fire TV, Google TV, Android TV. And again, that just comes directly from the Christian company that's developed the app right to your device, bypassing the gatekeepers. So
you know, this guest for the next two programs, this is a guest, Rick Renner is a guest that the late Tom Horn would have assigned to us.
Oh,
he would have said, go
absolutely.
read this book and talk to this man.
Absolutely. So thankfully, he came to us. Again, his new book, Fallen Angels, Giants, Monsters, and the World Before the Flood. We're honored to welcome to the program, Rick Renner. Rick, welcome to our program, and thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us this week.
I am so glad to be with you. I'm really impressed with both of you. I was on your website and I was reading some of your things. You guys are very smart, so you might leave me in the dust. But I want to say thank you for having me.
I suspect that won't be the case. We had the wonderful opportunity of talking with you when you were here in the Ozarks at Skywatch TV and found that we share a lot of research interests when it comes to especially the pre-flood world. And of course, that's the title of your most recent book, World Before the Flood. Why is that time prior to the flood of Noah important to understanding Christian theology?
Well, it was a time unlike any other time, except for the time we're living in now. And a lot of that era is being repeated again. But you know, Jesus said in Matthew 24:37, as it was in the days of Noah, it's going to be replicated again just before the coming of the Son of Man. And so I was just meditating on that. That's pretty significant that Jesus would say that. And that means if we want to know what's going to happen in the future, then we have to turn around to see what was happening in the world before the flood. So that period is very, very consequential because it's going to be replicated again at the end of the age.
Amen to that.
And of course, we have the record in Genesis chapter 6 that the sons of God, that's an Old Testament expression to describe the angels. These were watchers, as you well know, that had been set over the earth to help man in his fallen condition. And that would be just like God to do that. When man was kicked out of the Garden of Eden, God sent watchers in the earth to help man in his fallen condition. But according to Genesis chapter 6, particularly verse 2 and verse 3, those angels began to fixate on the women. And they desired these women, and they swore an oath between themselves. And that oath is recorded in the book of Enoch, chapter 6. Now, the book of Enoch is not a book of the Bible. Some people argue that maybe it should be. It is included in the canon in some Bibles. But I view the book of Enoch as very reliable commentary on what was taking place in the world before the flood. And according to the book of Enoch, particularly chapter 6, there was a group of 200 angels who swore an oath together that they would do a dastardly deed. And they knew they would be judged for it, but they decided to do it anyway, that they would abandon their posts. And by the way, guys, Jude refers to this, Peter refers to this, and they agreed together they would abandon their posts, descend into the atmosphere of the earth, and take women to mate with. And that's what the Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 6. And they had sex with women, and I know that raises a lot of theological questions. But that is what the Bible teaches. That is what the book of Enoch says. And guess what else? If you study the ancient church fathers and Jewish writers, they all spoke in unison on this subject. This was not just a strange fluke that somebody thought. They all said the same thing, that this is an event that took place. The women became impregnated. The women then gave birth to monstrous creatures, hybrids, which the Old Testament calls Nephilim. That's the Hebrew word, which is translated as the word giant. And these were gigantic hybrid creatures that roamed the earth and filled the earth with violence and corruption in the days before the flood. And that is the reason why God sent the flood. He wasn't trying to destroy the earth. He was trying to start a cleanup operation to get rid of this horrible influence, which really was proliferating all over the face of the planet. That's what was happening in the days before the flood. So does that answer your question?
You know, it does, and it seems to me the Lord was angry because the fallen, these rebel angels, were trying to pollute the human bloodline to stop the Genesis 3 promise from occurring, to stop Messiah
That's exactly what was happening. The devil heard that prophecy, that the seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent. And from that moment forward, the seed wars began. And the devil did his best to pollute the DNA of the human race so a woman could not bring forth the Messiah or the deliverer. That's what this thing was all about.
Amen. But it's been hidden. It's been rewritten, fake news, because now we're taught in seminary that it was the sons of Seth who did this. Now, when did that start, and why did that start?
Well, it started about the time of Augustine. And the reason that it started was because the pagan world was infatuated with Greek gods and Roman gods and Egyptian gods, and they were trying to come out of all of that paganism. So there was a thought, let's change the narrative. Let's say that these were not fallen angels. Let's try to remove all these pagan gods and all these celestial beings, get people's minds off of mythology, and let's change the narrative to say that these were the sons of Seth. And that was really their attempt to change the narrative. But in doing so, they messed everything up. And it's very important that we understand what was taking place in the world before the flood. You know, I've always said that I wish Steven Spielberg or somebody really marvelous with movies would make a real movie based on the first 10 chapters of the book of Genesis, because it was a world very different than anything we can imagine. Giants roaming the earth, and not just giants, but the book of the giants, which is another old extra-biblical book that predated the flood, states that the giants then had sex with the animals or defiled the animals, and it seems the animals then gave birth to monstrous creatures. And guys, if you study paganism, which you have done in mythology, all of the old pagan religions, whether it's Roman or Greek or Egyptian or Sasanian, or whether it's Akkadian or whether it's Persian, all of them tell the very same stories, that there was a pantheon of the gods who came down into the earth and they began to philander with women, and the women then begin to give birth to demigods or hybrid creatures. All of those ancient pagan religions told the same bare bones of the same story. Now, some of the story was legendized over time, we know that, but if you go back to the very bare bones of all those stories, they're all talking about the same event. And the Greeks said that the gods descended on Mount Olympus, but we know from the book of Enoch that really they descended on Mount Hermon, which is in Israel. That's where all this nefarious activity first began to take place. And so about the time of Augustine, they decided we need to get rid of all this. We need to get rid of all this paganism. So let's just change the narrative. And that's what they attempted to do. And because of that, today in seminaries all over the world, they wrongly teach that text. And they say that these were just the sons of Seth. And that's actually, if you follow that line of thinking, it's completely illogical.
The irony is that Augustine was also responsible for bringing the concept of the veneration of holy ancestors, the saints who have gone before, who could then intercede for us in the world, just as the Greeks and the Romans, the Canaanites, the Amorites believed that they could venerate these ancestral dead, the mighty men who were of old, the demigod heroes like Heracles and Perseus. Augustine said, well, the saints can intercede for us too, and basically tried to transfer this practice from the pagan world and to Christianize it.
Oh, that made it worse.
Yeah, because this is a practice that continues to the present day. So Augustine, on the one hand, trying to get the supernatural interpretation of Genesis 6 out of Christian theology, but then brought the occult pagan practices that generated and brought it into the Christian church because, as archaeologists have learned, Christians in the early church wouldn't stop this practice of venerating their ancestors, or what they believed were the spirits of their ancestors.
They
Actually,
did
the
not.
demonic spirits of the giants.
In fact, in the Vatican, the alleged tomb of Peter has a libation tube.
The one next to it.
Oh, the one next to it, sorry.
Yes.
I thought it was Peter's.
Is the one next to the one believed to be Peter's, has a libation tube, which is part of this ritual where the ancestral dead were summoned by name, and then they were offered bread and then a libation, a drink offering. So this continued into the early church, which is why most of the early churches in Rome, after Constantine legalized the faith, including St. Peter's Basilica, were built in cemeteries because that's where the ancestors were.
What evidence do we have archaeologically that points to the pre-flood world and then possibly the ark itself?
Well, let's talk about the pre-flood world. There are megalithic structures all over the face of the earth, which no one knows how they were built. You're well aware of this. You could go to Baalbek in Lebanon. That is amazing. There are places in South America. There are places in Malta. Massive, massive structures. And even we could even talk about the pyramids, where things were built with such precision that no one knows how they did it. But in the book of Enoch, it says very clearly that the fallen angels, these watchers, when they rebelled and they descended into the earth, they began to teach all kinds of sciences to men, and among them was architecture, logic, and they gave skills to man that man did not have prior to that time. And man began to build these megalithic structures, and they are just enormous. And some people believe, I think with a certain level of certainty, that probably the Nephilim themselves may have been involved in the building of some of these structures because, for example, at Baalbek, the stones are so massive, human beings could have never moved those stones by themselves. It took someone of an enormous size to move those stones. And so there's a lot of evidence. And of course, we know that there have been the discovery of skeletons. Most of them have been put away. They're not discussed because it flies in the face of evolution. It raises up all kinds of questions. But skeletons have been found even in New Mexico. You know, the giants appeared before the flood and after the flood. That's what the Bible says in Genesis 6, verse 4. Well, we know before the flood, they occurred because there was an incursion of angels that did the unthinkable. Well, how did they appear again after the flood? Well, it's logical that there was a second incursion and that another group of angels did it again. And the hybrids began to appear. And the land of Israel especially was filled with giants. There was even a valley of the giants. There were the Canaanites, there were the names are just so enormous, so many of them. It was a land of giants.
Whoa. Well, I need to be taking notes. I mean, there is just so much in there, but the great thing is you can get the book and the notes are in there.
Absolutely. You get it at all major book outlets. Of course, his website, Renner.org, where he's got plenty of other resources, both from him, from his wife, Denise, the family. Boy, we enjoyed meeting his son as well, who really has an interest in archaeology. Really delightful people. And we So happy that we had the opportunity to meet him. Really enjoy watching his program because he's got an academic rigor that he brings to the study, which is a field that can often be exploited and sensationalized.
Oh, I know. He's an expert in ancient Greek.
Yep.
And when you have something in the New Testament that you maybe, I think I know what this means, he'll come along and go, no, this is exactly what it means. But he also knows his Hebrew. He knows his Aramaic. He is an expert in so many languages. But we want to remind you, we have a special.
Oh, yes. We'll tell you about that and come back with more with Rick Renner. Jesus declared that the gates of hell would not prevail against his church. But humans have tried to contact fallen angels on the other side of those gates since the Stone Age, and they're still trying today. Arm yourself with information. During January, our special offer features our new books, The Gates of Hell and Destination Earth, co-authored with Donna Howell and Allie Anderson. Find out where Jesus was baptized, why it wasn't where most people think, and why it was a declaration of war against the fallen realm. How the belief in ancient aliens is based on the New Age and occult teachings of Madame Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley, and how Hollywood has effectively spread the ET gospel. Our 2 new books, plus the DVDs What Lies Beneath, about the world's oldest temple, Göbekli Tepe, and the 13-part teaching DVD based on the second coming of Saturn. This is a $99 value, but during January, it's just $45 plus shipping and handling. Only at gilberthouse.org/store. Welcome back to the Bible's Greatest Mysteries. I'm Derek Gilbert.
The Best of Sci Friday.
Yeah, this
is
a
one of my favorite. It's a 2-disc set, mind you.
300 episodes of that program, and again, part of our November
Not on
special.
here.
No, not all 300. I think, how many did we put on here? We put,
I don't know, but
16.
we did 300 episodes of that. We would love to go back to doing it.
Yep.
Many of you have asked us to do that, but we were just delighted to bring back this program, the Bible's Greatest Mysteries.
But for now, back to our discussion with Rick Renner.
You know, getting back to giant bones really
Yes.
quickly before we talk about that answer, I had to do research for St. Stephen's Church in Vienna for the Red Wing Saga, and one of the things I discovered is that the main entrance to that church is called the Giant's Door, because as they were excavating to put down the footing for the church, they discovered the bones of a giant. And so they put them over the door itself. Imagine that. The entrance to a church has a giant's bone over the door, as if it somehow has guardianship over whether or not we can enter.
This is not the stuff of fantasy. And I'll tell you that near the ruins of the Ark, you asked the question about the ruins of the Ark, Noah's Ark. Well, they really are laying on a lower mountain in the mountains of Ararat. Now, I know everybody's been looking for them on the peak of Mount Ararat, but the Bible never said the Ark landed on Mount Ararat. Genesis 8:4 says it landed in the mountains of Ararat. And the mountains of Ararat are a massive mountain range. And one of the lower mountains just across the valley from Mount Ararat, 18 miles on the other side of the valley, is a lower mountain which is called Mount Judi, which means Doomsday Mountain. And on that mountain, at about the elevation of 6,500 feet above sea, there is a massive ship-shaped object, exactly the same dimensions as Noah's Ark. And guess what? The last week, articles have come out in the Jerusalem Post, in the London Times, in the London Sun. I mean, the articles are just being printed one after another, and people are finally beginning to acknowledge this is likely the ruins of Noah's Ark. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because in the valley below, there is a grave for a giant. It's really there. They've seen it.
Really?
They unearthed it, and they said the head is about this big. It's enormous. And they covered it, and it's currently hidden because they don't want anyone to come in and scalp the site, steal the bones, raid the site. And so they are trying to hide the location of this giant's grave, but it really is just in the valley below where Noah's Ark today is sitting on Mount Judi in the mountains of Ararat.
So which country is in charge of that, Turkey or Armenia?
Turkey. It's Turkey. Now that area used to be Armenia, but where Noah's Ark is in Turkey. It's just across the border from Armenia, and it's about probably 200-300 meters from the border of Iran. And the Ark actually landed higher up the mountain, And the ancient name for the top of that mountain is the place of the landing.
Oh my.
And that is a mudslide. And so over all these 4,000 years, that ship moved down the side of that mountain because it is a mudslide, and it came to rest in its current location. Now, there are people that try to debunk it because in the middle of this giant ship-shaped object, there's a massive rock. But that rock rolled into this object. It is not connected to the geography of the area. In fact, all the new ground-penetrating radar, the ERT scans, show the complete hull of a ship. It is not connected to the bedrock. That big rock laying in the middle of it just rolled into it, and it seems like it is that rock that held it in its current location.
Oh my gosh.
Every spring when the snow melts and the rain comes and the mud begins to move, and it really is flood mud, all the side of the mountain moves except that object. And that giant ship-shaped object, year by year, is becoming more and more pronounced as the mud begins to move around it, exposing the sides of the ark. You can see the ribs of the ark. You can see them symmetrically. These things do not appear in nature. We know the ground-penetrating radar actually shows rooms and compartments and 3 decks. And the most recent analysis shows an empty corridor which goes from the bow of the ship to the center of the ship. It is so empty that if you could get to it, you could probably walk upright through that corridor. It is still empty. And that is the ruins of Noah's Ark. I really believe it, my friends.
Wow.
Watched your program some weeks ago. In fact, before we met you, about the altar of Noah. What happened to Noah and the family, and what evidence is there that this was the altar used by Noah to sacrifice and give thanks to the Lord after the ark came to rest?
Well, if I talk too much, you just interrupt me, okay? So when the ship came to land on the top of that hill, which is called the place of the landing, the Bible tells us Noah and the animals came out, and that Noah built an altar and offered the first sacrifice to the Lord. Well, not far from the place of the landing is a massive, massive altar, and the local Kurds, who have lived there for thousands of years, have identified that as the stone where Noah offered his sacrifice to God. And guys, that is the most impacting place for me of everything in that region of the world. When you see that altar and you see a channel cut across the top of it for the blood to flow off the top of that altar, you can even see the place where they killed the animals. And when you realize this is likely the very place where Noah first offered his sacrifice to God when he came off of the ark, I'm telling you, it just covers you with chill bumps just to realize you were there. This is where God first spoke. This is where the rainbow first appeared. And we know from Genesis chapter 10, verse 30, the first settlement to be built after the ark was called Mesha. Mesha, now that's very important. Guess what is the ancient name of that mountain? Today it's called Mount Judi. The ancient name of that mountain is Mishar. It's a derivative of Mesha. And just below the cliff, just above where the ark is, are 1,000-year-old ruins of a settlement. And if you study the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is another ancient flood account,
Yes.
it says that Gilgamesh came to interview the builder of the ark, and the builder of the ark was living just above the side of the ark and just below a crest of a mountain, which he called the place of the rising of the sun. It was a saddleback mountain. That is exactly what is above this Durupinar site where the ruins of the ark is today. And in those cliffs are petroglyphs, are you ready for this? Of elephants, giraffes, rhinoceros, all kinds of animals that are not native to Turkey. Who in the world saw those things? The people who came off the ark. And they commemorated what was with them by putting those petroglyphs on the sides of that cliff. There is so much evidence that that site really is the ruins of Noah's Ark.
He has brought things to life in this book, and really glad to see, again, academic rigor brought to this study, because many pastors won't discuss anything in the book of Genesis prior to chapter 12 where Abraham shows up.
You say the word Nephilim to a lot of pastors, and if they know what it means,
Yeah.
they just roll their eyes.
Exactly. And a lot of mainstream academics will look at it just from a curiosity. It's like, yes, the Hebrew prophets thought this is what this meant, but we don't really believe this is true.
Well, the explanations are coming from the secular world, and they're not, it's a twisting of truth.
Yeah.
Wrong conclusions.
Yes. And again, this is a topic that can be sensationalized. And, God does not need us to sensationalize his word because his word is pretty sensational as it is. Giants, that's why we wrote the book, Giants, Gods, and Dragons, because they're all in there and God calls them giants, gods, and dragons.
Yes.
So, well, we mentioned before the break, or right just after the break, that we're going to take a break during the month of December.
We're recording this on the 5th of November, which is voting day.
Guy Fawkes Day.
Guy Fawkes Day in other parts of the world, exactly. But we don't want to go there. But what that actually means, bonfires everywhere. There are parts where we until we had the rain, we wouldn't have been able to do that here, even if we'd wanted to. But because you are going for surgery this Friday, the 8th, and you will have a little bit of recovery time. It's vascular surgery. It's relatively simple, we're told, but then again, a simple procedure is something done on someone else.
Yes, my dad's famous line.
Yeah.
It basically is to correct a small aneurysm. It's so small that at this point it's at very, very low risk of rupture.
Well,
but it's the kind of thing, let's correct it now before it becomes a risk, because it's the kind of thing where it sits. The artery is large enough that if it were to rupture, it would be very dangerous. So that will be corrected November 8th. So by the time you're seeing this, I will probably be well into recovery, but that means the upcoming weeks after next week's program with Rick Renner, we'll take a few weeks off and then we'll come back with new programs probably in January.
Yep. So 5 and 10 may have a few weeks off, but definitely the programs you and I do for GHTV, Unraveling Revelation, our Gilbert House Fellowship, View from the Bunker possibly, but definitely this program, Bible's Greatest Mysteries. We are going to take a little bit of a hiatus, but you will get to watch the best of. Derek's going to go through the archives and pull out some really great programs.
Oh, my goodness. I'm thinking the Dr. Doug Petrovich programs.
That made him cry and me cry.
Yeah. Or maybe the Timothy Alberino programs.
Those are good. L.A. Marzulli. Aaron Lipkin.
Go into the archives on the app and watch the old programs. Or if you're on YouTube, go back in the playlist and watch the early programs. We'll be recycling some of those on our app over the next few weeks. But there's some mind-numbing, just jaw-dropping content there, especially Doug Petrovich, The Origins of the Hebrews, Timothy Alberino talking about,
birthright.
This is why we do this program. The Bible is sensational.
And it's why you need the app. You know, it's a community on the app. You have an area where you can talk to one another. You can ask us questions. But you can arrange a watch party. Let's all watch this particular episode, and then we'll talk about it in the app. What do you think about that?
I think that's a good idea.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, please come back next week as we continue our discussion of the book Fallen Angels, Giants, Monsters, and the World Before the Flood with Rick Renner. And until then, thank you for watching the Bible's Greatest Mysteries.